Well, here we are on the 13th of December, 2005 at Gary Dumond's place on Eagle Lake. Built this a couple of years ago, had the lot for quite a while. It's got a great view, the length of the lake. It's very cold today, about 10 degrees. It's going to be colder tonight. We're going to talk to Gary about Vietnam, where he was gone in 1970 for a whole year. It's the inside of Gary's new home. Very nice. Really likes it on Eagle Lake. Retired now from Ski-Doo dealership. It's got a cathedral ceiling here. Here's old Gary. How old are you, Gary?
I'm going to be 56 next month.
56 next month. So, Vietnam is 35 years ago.
It's a long time ago.
How old were you?
When I went to flight school, I just turned 19, and when I actually got to Vietnam and started flying, I was still 19. I'd been there about 2 weeks when I turned 20.
Let's go back to, you're a Fort Kent native?
Yep. I graduated in 68.
68. So, where were you born? Where the Ski-Doo shop is?
I was actually born in Soldier Pond.
Oh, your parents lived there?
Yep, and born on my grandfather's farm. My mother's father. The barn's still living. It's where Bob Daigle lives now, on the back road there in Soldier Pond.
Do they call that Soldier Pond? Is that New Canada? What is it?
They say to change. I think it's called the Strip Road, or it used to be the Strip Road. I'm not sure.
Okay. What was your father doing at the time?
Then, well, of course, I don't remember that, but everybody tells me, of course, he was running Fort Kent Flying Service.
Flying service.
Yeah. That's what he did. Of course, everybody remembers him for state police and for the Ski-Doo shop, but I mean, he actually ran the flying service for 8 or 10 years before state police.
Well, he's the guy that used to come to St. Agatha in Long Lake in the sporting club.
I remember doing that when I was in grammar school. I mean, like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I went with him every Sunday to give rides.
At the sporting club?
Yeah, that's where it all started for me.
And he, it seems to me, he used to land in the fields across from my house.
Yeah, that was before my time. He used to do that, and they'd land on Saturdays and Sundays and give rides, and he'd usually bring Uncle Finn with him or Uncle Phil. And they do that there. They did it in Madawaska, and they even did it some in Van Buren. They did that for quite a few years. And then when the pontoons became a little more popular and people started going to the lake, then he started doing it at Black Joe's at the sporting club.
Oh yeah. Remember what he charged for a ride?
I can remember that so well. It was $2 a head or $3 if two got in. And I mean, he used to go and turn over Birch Point and then turn down towards Sinclair and come back and land. You were probably in the air 4 or 5 minutes, but what you saw in 4 or 5 minutes would have took you 2 hours in a car.
Yeah. So he actually made money doing that.
Oh yeah, he did that for, when he ran the Fort Kent Flying Service, and then he went into state police, I think in 54.
Okay, so you graduated in 68. So the draft is on when you graduate.
Definitely, but that was never a factor with me because, I knew I wanted a career in aviation, and I knew that was very expensive, and my whole idea was to go into the Army and fly airplanes. I wasn't going there to fly helicopters, but guess what? They needed helicopter pilots. They really didn't need airplane pilots, but that's how I got it started, and I knew it was a heck of an education. I mean, I spent 48 weeks in training.
It's almost a year.
Yeah, and at that time, they figured that was about a $250,000 education. I mean, if you would have went out and bought that, that's what it would cost you. Imagine what it would cost today.
Yeah. So you're coming out of high school. Did you join up right away?
Yeah, well, here's what happened is George Pooler and Milford Peltier are probably a little responsible for that. I remember seeing an ad in a flying publication, and there was an ad, and there was a helicopter, and it said high school to flight school. Because, in the military, most people have 4 years of college. I mean, you really don't get in unless you have your college.
You're talking about flying.
Yes, and to get to be a pilot. But they had this deal. Of course, the war's going on. They needed pilots, and you went and took this test. And I remember I went to Bangor. It was an all-day test. It took 6 hours in about 40-minute increments, different parts of the test. Then if you passed that test, then you went for an oral interview it was in Portland, some generals and stuff. Then if you get through that, then they sent you to Loring to take a first-class flight physical. Then if you were through that, then you were guaranteed, if you enlisted, that you could go to flight school. The only thing is you were not guaranteed that you were going to get out of flight school, because flight school was tough. I mean, very tough for a 18 and 19-year-old. I mean, it was an eye-opener.
So you're right out of high school doing that?
Right. I graduated in the fall, and in January I was in the service.
So how much flying did you have before that with your dad?
I mean, listen, I've been around airplanes. That's all I've ever really wanted to do, and even today I'm an airplane nut. But I really learned to fly with my father when I was probably 13, 14 years old. And when I was a junior in high school, I got my solo license the same week that I got my driver's license.
You learned both at the same time, huh?
Yeah, the airplane thing was, I think it was a little harder to learn to drive the car, actually, but it's something I always wanted to do.
Yeah. And your dad was into that too. He liked it too.
Oh, yeah, I mean, he didn't move on it. If he was headed to the airplane or anything to do with the airplane, he couldn't move, and I wasn't on his tail. And, I had 3 other brothers home. They were younger, but, they were smaller too, so I made sure that I went and they didn't.
Your father was in World War II?
Yes.
And tanks, I think,
Yes,
huh?
tanks, yeah.
So he didn't learn to fly there?
He learned to fly right when he got out of the war in Connecticut. And I hear my uncles and them talk when they get together, and he come home, he bought an old J5 cruiser with, I think it had 75 horsepower engine, and if you can imagine, he landed that on the farm in Dagle and parked that on the front lawn, and people going by, I mean, it'd be like landing a moonship today. And,
yeah.
It's quite a thing.
Yeah, this is like
an airplane that George Dumond parked on the front lawn.
Never had any scares?
Oh, I'm sure he did too. I mean, pilots talk, and him and I talk. I mean, you got to remember, he did that for an awful long time, and yeah, he had some scares. He put one down in the Pearl of Brook there in the back of Joe Charrette's junkyard with 3 other people. They didn't get hurt very bad, but totaled the airplane.
Really? What happened there? He just ran out of...
Well, it's a long story, but let me just tell you that somebody borrowed the gas that was in the tank and replaced it with water.
Oh, the boys.
Again, that was before I was born.
Yeah.
You get pictures of that.
Is it because they didn't like your father?
No, I think they just wanted the gas.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Was he a state cop at the time?
No, that was before he state cop. Yeah. And matter of fact, he had my mother with him, and they weren't even married.
Wow.
At the time.
Yeah, boy, huh?
And then he had my aunt and her husband.
Did he land on the...
No, he put it down in the woods, right?
In the woods?
Yeah, and I think if I remember right, him saying something about he cut like 17 trees. But that's the thing you need to do when you put one into the woods, because the trees is what absorbs all the shock, and takes the wings off and everything. And the airplane comes to a stop. Hopefully you just get out.
Wow.
Which is what they did.
Wow. Holy mackerel. So you're going to, so you pass all these tests.
Yeah, the written test is, I can remember that so well, because you got to remember, I did this while I was still a junior. That's when I started the process. That's not something that took a week or two. That took like 6 months. Because I wanted to make sure when I signed on the dotted line that the only reason I didn't get through flight school was because maybe I couldn't cut the mustard. I was guaranteed flight school after I did this. But the written test, it was either 22 or 26 of us that took it, and all those guys were in college or out of college, and there's only 3 of us that passed it. And I mean, I just barely passed it. There was stuff on there, there was a lot of algebra and stuff, and I didn't have a lot of that in high school, but there was also a lot of stuff that was aviation related, like showing instruments and what is this airplane doing. Well, I knew what that was all about, and well, of course, maybe the guys went to college, they'd never seen those instruments.
Oh, yeah. You had an advantage there.
I had an advantage, but they had an advantage too, but I think I had more of an advantage.
So you felt real good about that.
Oh, once I got accepted, yeah. But I was, you know, you're 18 years old, and you know the war's going on, and you know that that's what you're going there for. I mean, you know, they're not training helicopter pilots to send you to Alaska that time of year, you know, in those years. And when I got to flight school, that was hard work. I mean, the flying was, and I'm not bragging, the flying came pretty easy. It was the ground school and the OCS training. I remember calling my father after about 5 weeks, and I said, you know, I can get out of this right now and only have a 2-year enlistment if I get out right now, because I mean they were on you all the time, except on the flight line. When half a day was at the flight line, they didn't bother you there. All you did was fly, and that was like going to the carnival. It was just so nice, you know. But when you were back in the company area, and half of the day you'd do your classwork stuff. There's a lot more to learning to fly than just flying the aircraft. There's a lot of ground school goes with that, and they kept after you there all the time, you know.
So was it like in the army, or was it physical,
Oh, yeah.
Physical as well, like you know?
Yeah, physical. I remember we were running 7 miles. Of course, I weigh quite a lot less than I do now, but oh yeah, there was. I mean, it was in the army. It was flight school.
Basic training at the same time.
We did the first, did 4 weeks of basic training. We went right to flight school in Mineral Wells, Texas, which is just west of Fort Worth. And I mean, you get there and you get off the bus, and there's helicopters in the air everywhere, and everybody's looking up. And I remember one drill sergeant saying, "Hey, you fellows, be careful! You're going to sunburn the roof of your mouth," because you know we're all looking like, I mean, there's hundreds of helicopters, you know.
So how did you leave Fort Kent when you, what was it, in the summer of 56
No,
or
I left
68?
I left in January of '69, right after the first year.
Okay, so
And I
you
graduated from flight school that December 15. I remember that real well.
almost a year.
Yeah, and then I come home for 30 days, got engaged, and then we went to war.
So who drove you, how did you get the south?
I remember that well. I stayed at Pauline's house till like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then Henry Sear, that used to drive for Daigle Oil, he went to Bangor every day to get fuel, and I knew him real well, and he gave me a ride. That picked me up in Fort Kent and gave me a ride to Bangor. And I remember he took me to Dijak and says, "I'm going to buy you breakfast," because he said, "You may never have another one like this again." And we went over and had breakfast, and I remember my flight left like around 7:30 in the morning. I met another guy there I met him right there. He was from East Corinth. I'd never saw him in my life, and we went through flight school together. His name was Wayne Crocker. And we went through flight school together, and he came home, and when we came home at Christmas,
After the year of training. Right?
yes, he came up, and he came up, spent a few days with me, and he just passed away down in Togus a year ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Young man? What happened to him?
Wayne was quite a lot older than I was. He had cancer. I'd say Wayne was, he was 60. He died last year. He was 63.
Had cancer.
Yeah.
So Henry
Henry Sear gave me a ride down. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah.
And so then you took off for Texas.
That's when I went to Vietnam that Henry gave me a ride down.
Oh, after your...
Yes, after the training.
Oh, so you were...
Oh yeah.
Ready to go.
When I first went down to go to flight school, I think my dad took me down. Pretty sure. And that I flew out of Presque Isle, and that was back in the Northeast Airlines. That's before Delta. I was Northeast Airlines.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Propellers or jets?
Yeah, prop jump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, had you a lot of your friends there and then graduated in '68? Some of them got drafted.
Oh yes, I mean some enlisted, some got drafted for sure. I mean I'm positive of that, and some got killed in Vietnam. I can remember Bennett Daigle. I think maybe he's the only one that I'm pretty sure.
He was in the Marines.
Yes.
That's Bert Daigle's brother.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was in my class.
So the feeling of high school guys, they're seniors in high school. They're all subject to the draft. They all think they might end up in Vietnam.
Yeah,
how did you feel?
I don't know that a lot of us weren't really concerned about that. I mean, yeah, you know, you know you're going to go to war if you go in the service. That's what you're going in the service for. Maybe because we're 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
Because I can remember guys that were 4, 5, 6 years older than me when I was in Vietnam, and they had maybe 1 or 2 kids at home, and that was tough. That was tough for those guys.
So you're in Texas for a year.
Actually, Mark, I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for basic training.
Okay.
For 4 weeks. Then they hauled us to Texas for 22 weeks, okay, of flight training. And then I had a week off, and the next station was Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. And that was the advanced training. That's when we started flying the real stuff, the UEs and the gunships, and then you knew that it was the real thing because it changed pace drastically.
Really?
And we were there, and then you were right into it. And then the pilots you were flying with there, the instructor pilots, a lot of them had just come back from Vietnam. Matter of fact, a little story to that, because when I took my final check ride in December of '69, when I graduated from flight school, the gentleman that gave me the check ride, his name is Otis Gray, and he was from Maine. He found out I was from Maine, and so I had him as my last check pilot, and get to know him for a couple of days there, and then never thought I'd ever see him again. And 2 years later, I'm in Greenville. I'm back from Vietnam, and I'm working for the Fish and Game Department. And this guy walks over, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and it was Otis. And we've been the best of friends since. And he worked for the Maine Forest Service, a helicopter pilot, while I worked for Fish and Game. Flying all these years, and we were in Alaska together 2 years ago for a month.
Did he, when he gave you your last checkup there, was he back from Vietnam?
Yes, he had just got back, maybe a couple months.
Is that right?
He was Otis a couple of years older than I am.
Did he go again?
No.
No.
Most guys went once. If you stayed in and made more of a commitment to it. I've got a friend that went 3 different times. He lost a leg, and I see him about every 4 or 5 years in Las Vegas. He went 3 times, and the 3rd time he got beat up pretty bad. But guess what? He skis and everything.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, Jim Stein, quite something.
So now all this flight training was with helicopters,
yeah,
which you didn't know you were going to get into.
Oh yeah, I had a pretty good idea, but I knew that like 5% of the pilots that were training, they were training to fly fixed-wing airplanes. But Vietnam was a helicopter war. That was known as the helicopter war. There was very little need for airplane pilots. There was need for some, but what they needed was helicopter pilots. You got to remember it. In Vietnam, in the whole time of the Vietnam War, there was over 10,000 helicopters used in Vietnam. It takes a lot of pilots to fly that, and it change every year. That it changes.
So, who's on that helicopter? You have a co-pilot?
Yeah. What happens is when you get there, you're a co-pilot, and every company is a little different. Some have, your peers decide when you're ready to become an aircraft commander. Generally, you become an aircraft commander after you've been there 5 or 6 months. In my case, I became an aircraft commander just after 3 months. There was a little more demand, and evidently they felt I was ready for it. And I look back on it now, and I talk to some of these guys. They're getting on board here, and the aircraft commander is 18 years old, 18 and a half years old, 19 years old. But then everybody else was not much older either.
So that means you're in charge of that pilot, of that helicopter.
In Army aviation, the aircraft commander, when you get to the flight line, the aircraft commander, whether he's a warrant officer or first lieutenant, if the co-pilot is a colonel, the colonel takes his marching orders from the aircraft commander.
Oh, is that right?
The aircraft commander is the man, and a lot of responsibility goes with that. You got other people that are on board with you. You got a co-pilot, you've got a gunner, and you've got a crew chief. Plus, you got the people you're transporting if that's what you're doing. That particular mission. And then there's a lot of other things, a lot of security involved. Every day we'd pick up a little book that go around our neck with a rope, and that had all the different frequencies for different companies. Of course, you didn't want that getting in the wrong hands. Viet Cong and VA would get it at times anyway, but there was a lot went with that, being an aircraft commander.
You had to know a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you got to think you're not the only helicopter there. You hardly ever did anything with one helicopter. There was always 2, 3, 4, 5. I've seen insertions where there would be 20 helicopters but you wouldn't go in a group of 20, you'd go in maybe 4 groups of 5, about a minute apart or something. 5 or 6 is about as much as you could do at one time into a landing zone or something.
So now you're up here for a month before you go. Your flight school's over. You got engaged, you said,
Yep.
at that time?
Yep.
With Pauline?
Yep.
What's her last name?
She was a Karen.
Karen? And then you say goodbye and you go.
Yeah.
Must have been tough, huh?
It was tough, and you're engaged and you're young and everything. And like I said, though, I remember being over there, and of course you're anxious to come home, and time doesn't go by that fast. But I remember some of my partners, other pilots, and that were there, and they'd have pictures of their kids that were maybe 2 years. I mean, there were some there that had kids born while they were there.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've seen guys like that just shake, when they have a month to go, and I've seen guys not break down, but there's a lot, you keep thinking, well, I got a month to go, am I going to make it? And a lot of funny things happen there,
So you were just 19 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And you were hanging around with
The average age.
guys who had families.
Yeah, there was other guys there weren't married. There was one other pilot, Jim Smith, and he was about my age. He was maybe a few months older than I was. Generally, the pilots were 22 to 25. I mean, there was some 30, 32. But I'd say I think in one of the books I got, it said the average age of Army helicopter pilot was 24 years and 7 months or something like that.
What's your land in Vietnam? That's what you're on a big plane, and here you come into Vietnam. The war is going full blast.
Oh, listen, I can remember. First of all, we take off and we fly to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, we get on a chartered jet. We go to Hawaii. We go to Guam, and then we land. And we're supposed to land in Bien Hoa, which is just north of Saigon. Well, we're on short final, probably in a jet that's a couple of miles out, and there was an airplane, a fighter crashed on the other runway. We couldn't land. And we could see it. The pilot's talking, we're looking out the window, and you can see the smoke coming up. And so we went and landed at Ton Chunut, which is the air base right in Saigon, which is only about 20 miles away.
Yeah.
So then you land, and then you don't know anybody there. You're just getting there, and there's places there, and whoever you're assigned to, they have a bus there, and they pick you up, and they bring you to what they call an in-processing center.
You're all pilots on this flight.
On that crew, no, there was some of everything.
Okay.
There was pilots, there was everybody. There was a fair amount of, there was 4 or 5 different pilots right on that airplane that graduated with me. And then they bring you to an in-processing center for pilots, and then they start, okay, what kind of flying would you like to do? Like you're going to have much of a choice. Well, come find out you did have a choice. I mean,
really?
Yeah, the guy that did the in-processing, I can't remember his name, but he went to University of Maine at Orono for 2 years. He was a captain. And Wayne Crocker, that was with me, Wayne said, well, what choice do we have? He says, well, we've got some VIP flying. It was called the Green Deltas, and they'd fly the generals and colonels around. And he said, we got some slots there, and he says, we got some slots with some assault helicopter companies. And I said, well, I think that's what I'd more like to do. And he says, I'm going to send you to the Cowboys. And I said, the Cowboys? He says, the 335th Assault Helicopter Company. I said, okay. See, every company had a nickname. I mean, one would be Gunslinger, and the other one would be Outlaws, and there was hundreds of companies, and they all had a name. We happened to be called the Cowboys, and on our helmets we had the star of the Dallas Cowboys.
Oh yeah.
On our flight helmets. So Wayne and I parted ways there the next day. I mean, he got assigned down to Canto, which was about 120 miles south of where I was, and I went about 40 miles away to a place called Bearcat. And that's where I went got assigned to the 335th Assault Helicopter Company. You get in there, then you're there for a couple days, and you find out how they do things, and then they schedule you with an in-country check ride with a senior pilot, and all that does is, get you oriented a little bit to where you're at there, and you do that, because the first few weeks you're there and you fly, you might touch the controls straight and level, but basically you're looking around. And then you start sharing the flying right away. You do one insertion, the aircraft commander flies, the next one would be your turn, and then you switch back and forth like that. And you got to remember, you do that sometimes all day, 10, 12. I've sat in one of those for 14 and a half hours, never shut the engine off.
Wow.
Well, you got to refuel every 2 hours and 15 minutes, because that's it. That's all you've got fuel for. But there's fuel everywhere. And it's not even guarded or anything, because who's going to steal it? Well, what are they going to burn it in? There's no roads where we are, speak of, and there's certainly nothing that would burn jet fuel. And so it's a little bit of a learning process there, the first month or two, and then there's some things that get your attention, because when you start flying at night, believe me, I've flown in the state of Maine at night a lot, probably as much as most anybody, and it can get pretty dark around here, especially when you go west of here. Nothing like it is over there. I mean, there's no horizon over there. The little villages of 800,000 people, there's hardly any lights, because everything is lanterns, there's no power a lot of them places. So at night it's black, I mean really black. And it took a little while getting used to, but the night flying, but you know what, that's what I ended up doing for 5 or 6 months straight. Just every night, I flew every night. Volunteered for that. There were some people just didn't want nothing to do with that. I kind of liked it, because you did your own thing. You didn't have to worry about a lot of other aircraft being out there. You were an easier target, as long as you had your lights on, but most of the time we flew with our lights off. So all they heard was a noise, but they didn't know if it was there or there.
Oh. Now we had a guy here who you're talking about at night there, where there's nothing. And Maine is like that. You can fly. We had, was there a town policeman in Madawaska?
Oh yeah, Lou Daigle.
Lou Daigle.
Yeah, and what happened there?
Haynesville Woods, was it?
That was actually it was north of Holton, somewhere in the back of Monticello somewhere. I went to that accident site. I flew some investigators up. I remember that very well. Night flying is very nice, because it's usually the air is pretty smooth and everything, but everything looks different at night. Everything looks close. When you see, like you take off from Eagle Lake here, headed to Old Town at night, which I've done so many times, well, right away you see the lights of Ashland, and it looks like it's right there. Everything looks closer at night.
Really?
Lights. But if you head like west of here, you head towards the Allegash Waterway, towards St. Paulfield and Clayton Lake, ain't no lights. There ain't no towns there. It's pretty dark.
So you're instrument flying at that point?
You're using a combination of both the instruments. In Vietnam, you had to use the instruments a lot, because you had no horizon. You never knew where the earth stopped and the sky started, because it was all the same color.
Really?
Yeah. But where I was in the southern part of South Vietnam, we're pretty lucky, because there was not a lot of hills there. It was really in the Mekong Delta. It was pretty flat. And if you get up 400 or 500 feet, you could probably fly for a couple hundred miles and never hit anything.
Huh. Now you talk about flying. You're just not flying around. You're on missions.
Oh, everything. You don't just get in a helicopter. I mean, there's the night before what the mission is. I mean, there's stuff. It's an assault helicopter coming. You're not flying resupply from ship to shore there or anything like that. You're flying assault helicopter is basically you're flying troops into where there's a hot area, and the reason you're bringing them there is because there's some enemy there. You ain't bringing them there for any other reason. When you'd go get them, a lot of times the enemy was gone, because they neutralized them or did what they had to do. But every landing, you were getting shot at. And I mean,
holy geez.
And I mean, you hear it. I've seen it. I mean, I've been pulling into an LZ and be the lead ship and see 4 or 5 muzzle flashes, and you just can't turn around there, because you got 4 or 5 other helicopters right behind you. You got to think about them. You got to leave them room. And even though everybody thinks a helicopter, you can stop and go, it doesn't work like that. I mean, there's a lot of momentum. You got to get that stop. When you're loaded, it's altogether different. It takes almost as much room as a small airplane, and you've got to continue down, drop your people, and then you can't just leave. You got to wait till the 5th helicopter gets down, because when you leave, he's the first one out.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, unless you've got a way. I mean, and that's all decided before you land. I mean, if you're a flying lead that day, you'd say, okay, guys, we're going in this LZ. When we depart, it's going to be a left brake. Or when we depart, it's going to be trail, you're first. That means everybody does a 180-degree pedal turn, and out you go. You've got gunships both sides of you coming down, our own gunships. And I mean, they're prepping the LZ, because that'll take a lot of the pressure off you. You're still getting shot at. But, when the rockets are coming down on the NVA or the Viet Cong, it takes a lot of their attention away. from you. But the coverage is so close that many times I've had mud and debris fly on the helicopter from where our gunships were shooting. That's how close the coverage we had.
Oh,
And it took a while, the first month or two you're there. I mean, it's but then you learn to really love that, because it didn't work like that for everywhere. Just, you know, a lot of the companies had their own gunships, and ours were just really good.
So what was your first experience there? You brought soldiers to...
Oh yeah, it was air assault. You got to remember where I was. We were supporting the ARVN troop, which was the Republic of Vietnam, their own troops. Okay, and we were doing. We flew American troops some, but by then they were trying to get the Vietnamese to take care of a lot of their own stuff, and you know, we'd bring them into battle. I mean, a heck of a thing there. You got 12, 14 of them guys in the back, and they know where they're going, and it's hot, and they're going there for a reason, because there's some enemy there, and you're going in, and I mean, you can hear it, and it sounds like a popcorn. I mean, as loud as a Huey is, you can hear it. You can hear it 1,500 feet, so you can imagine what you can do when you're at a hover, and it sounds like a popcorn machine. Pop, 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 pop. And sometimes when it would hit, most of the time it hit the aircraft, you could have it hit 10, 12 times, you wouldn't know it till you get back, unless it hit a vital, which I've had that happen. I mean, I've had it go right through an altimeter, shatter the glass. That's what these scars are right here, pieces of glass.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't even know. All I knew was bleeding a lot, and I didn't know what had happened for a minute. After that, I knew what I was. I remember I took a Nomex flight glove, and I chewed it to stop the blood. Because I mean, you know, you got stuff to do. There was no hurt or pain or nothing. Some of it is I remember feeling picks, and I rubbed it, and when I rubbed it, I pushed the glass in a little further. Yeah. And of course, I'm wearing a helmet, and the helmet's got a visor, and it's down, and that's what the visor's for, is protection. And I can't even remember if it's this side or this side, the little scar, but when I rubbed it, if I wouldn't have touched anything, probably it wouldn't have been much of anything, you know.
Yeah.
This here was cut pretty good, but you know, it's happening. I mean, that's what you're there for. But just think of the poor guys you're dropping off.
Oh.
And the Vietnamese troops, they didn't have the equipment our troops had, and I mean, some of them were young kids. I mean, it was just terrible. And I mean, you drop off. They didn't want to get off sometimes. I mean, and you can't be waiting. I mean, when you come to a hover, they got to get off, because you got to get out of there. And very seldom do I remember picking up troops in a hot LZ, because you know, if anything, you bring more troops in if they're that much. But occasionally, I can remember going to pick up troops and getting shot at. And I'm gonna tell you, it didn't take them all week to get on.
Yeah.
And the problem was happening there was you'd like to take. See, the Vietnamese troops were quite a lot smaller, so generally you could take 13 or 14 of them with their gear. I mean, you could take 10 Americans with max, basically. You've been known to do more than that. I remember one time having 19. And what can you do? They're just getting on. There ain't even any seats. They just pile on. And the crew chiefs tried, you know, they don't want to wait for the next helicopter, you know, they want out of there. And I mean, and you just don't, by then you just don't pick up power and go. I mean, you got to do everything right, because you're right on a borderline of not having enough power. And sometimes you almost had to bounce it to get it moving. You know?
So you did pick some up, but you mostly you were delivering soldiers.
Well, you'd always go back and get them when their job was done, which might have been that later that day or the next day or maybe 2-3 days later. But and sometimes you'd bring more reinforcements. But like I say, it was all Vietnamese troops. They just didn't have the equipment our guys did. They'd have a bag of rice tied here, and of course they could survive on so much less, you know, than our people, because that's what they were used to. But they were so young, and they didn't even have as good of weapons as our people had, you know. And of course, a lot of the enemy, depending if they were fighting the see, you got to remember, in Vietnam, you had two enemies there. You had the North Vietnamese Army, which was a very well trained army. And then you had the Viet Cong. Basically, the Viet Cong is your farmer by day that waves to you when you fly by, but at night when you fly by, he's shooting at you. Okay.
Get me through this difference of the regular army and Viet Cong. Viet Cong.
The NVA, the North Vietnamese Army. I mean, they were a regimented army. You know, they had better equipment. Thank God they didn't have any helicopters. But
there were no aircraft on their side.
They did up north. In the jets, they had fighters.
The North Vietnamese?
Oh yeah, they had MiGs, and that's why we had so many Air Force and Navy pilots. You know, some of them got shot down by artillery, but some of them got shot down by enemy. They didn't have nothing like what we had, you know. But the Russians were right behind them. That's where all their equipment and their training came from. But
Chinese, the Chinese too, were they?
No, the Chinese weren't involved there that I know of.
I think there was always historically a conflict between China and Vietnam.
Oh yes,
they didn't like each other.
I don't think they like each other too well today.
Yeah, so the Russians were supplying.
Yes, and the ground troops, like, get back to that, the North Vietnamese, they were more of a trained army, you know, and they like an army would be, whereas the Viet Cong was kind of like almost like a National Guard type thing, okay? But they didn't know who they were a lot of times, you know, because in the daytime, you know, they were just your farmers, and at night they went to war. I mean, some of them fought in the daytime too, but that's what they were, and that was a tough situation. That's why you never knew the good people are here, the bad people are here, because the bad people were everywhere. I mean, they're behind you, they're in front of you, because there's no lines in Vietnam. It's you know, they're everywhere. They'd do things like, I can remember this very well. They'd hire Vietnamese locals to work on the Army and Navy bases, and you know, to come in and do cleaning and different things. And they got to where they would, some of them would, they would get a hold of like a hand grenade. They would wrap it one time with black electrical tape, and they would pull the pin. If they could get near the flight line, they'd walk by, take the fuel cap off on the U, and drop it. And I guess it would take about 4 to 6 hours for the fuel to dissolve the tape. When the tape dissolve, then and I mean, I remember getting back to Dong Tam one night, and so we said, hey, well, look at that, and there's what's left of a Huey there. And we figured, gee, they must have got mortared, know what had happened. Somebody got on the flight line. Security wasn't all that great there, because it was tight to get on the base, but once you got on the base, they figured everybody was all right. Well, it wasn't always all right, and that's why you couldn't leave anything hanging loose.
So you'd have these Vietnamese people working for the army?
A lot of they do your laundry and stuff.
And they were undercover. And
they would steal. They'd check them at night when they'd go off the base, and I mean, they'd get some lugging flight manuals for Hueys, and you know, so anything you left out, they could take it. And you just think, going back to that hand grenade deal, and that happened more than once, but just think if somebody an hour later happens to go out there, or 2 hours later, and get in that and go, their history.
That's it.
Yeah.
Boy, how did we finally found out about that?
Well, I mean, a helicopter don't blow up just sitting there.
So it took a while to figure it out.
Took a while, but it didn't take a long time. And I'm sure that wasn't the first time that ever happened in Vietnam. When it happened there in Dong Tam, I never forget that, because it was, I remember there was just a tail of the Huey sitting out there and the tips of the blades. I mean, it was, and it was parked in a revetment, which is a place where you park the helicopters. You hover them in there and you set them down. That way, if you get mortared pretty close, it doesn't really get hurt bad unless it gets a direct hit. And here's this thing. I mean, there's nobody who would have been good enough to mortar that, hit it right dead on in the middle, in the daytime, because they hardly ever did mortaring at night. In the daytime, they did it all at night. And mortaring is the enemy on the outside of the base. They get those tubes, and they get it set up about right, and then you might be watching a movie there at night, and first thing you know, you hear it. Before it hits, you hear the first one. It's a whistling. Everybody scatters. You got bunkers to go to. After you've been there 7 or 8 months, some of the guys didn't even move, which was crazy. And I did the same thing. But
you wouldn't move.
Well, we'd say, oh, it'll be over in 10 minutes, you know. And I mean, but I mean, it could happen. I mean, it could have landed on you just as well. I mean, people get killed quite often on mortar attacks, you know. So
the Army, how did this war start anyway? I know the French were there.
The French were there, and there was a lot of...
and then they had it's like Korea, they had a line, DMZ.
North Viet, and the French, it's funny you mention that, because you know what? There was a lot of the older Vietnamese that talked French.
Yeah.
A place we'd go that would cut hair just outside of the little village in Dong Tam, the guy spoke, you know, him and I conversed in French. And he was as surprised as I was, you know. But the French had been there. We saw airstrips that they'd built, and private businesses that had started ventures in Vietnam.
Well, they were there for many years.
Oh, yeah, they were there. I mean, I'm not a big history of that, but they were there a long time before we were.
Yeah, it was a colony.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, like in Africa, they had a bunch of...
And Vietnam, it didn't start poof, big right off the bat. But I mean, it got really something by the mid '60s, right up through in the '71, '72. Then things were happening there.
So 68, 69 was.
I'd say the biggest years in Vietnam was '67, '68, '69, '70. When I got there, it was still awesome. But by then, you're starting to turn over some of the stuff to the Vietnamese troops that supposedly were being trained, and to the extent they were being trained. But I mean, we think we had it bad. The guys got drafted over there. You got drafted, and you didn't get paid. I mean, it's you just went.
Yeah.
We had Vietnamese pilots that were trained in the States. Because when I went to flight school in Texas, I flew with 2 of them. And what happens, they'd take some of these Vietnamese that were, showed some promise. They'd send them to somewhere in Texas for like 18 months just to learn to speak English. Then they turn around and send them to flight school for a year. Then they send them home. They've been gone 2.5 years. Well, guess what? Then they get assigned to a company, a flight company. And after they've been home about 2-3 weeks, some of them guys are gone. They haven't been home 2.5 years. They don't even give them a week to go home. They send them right there, And so there was a desertion problem there, And there was a problem with the North Vietnamese Army. Well, a lot of people didn't realize that, but in the mid-'60s, they had a lot of desertion on their side. I mean, there was no, you're here for a year and you go home, There you went and you were there forever, basically, And they weren't going anywhere. They get their butt kicked pretty hard in the mid-'60s, and the morale was really bad. And I see this on the military channel now, hearing about this, and the morale was really bad, and there was a big desertion problem. But then along about '68, '69, and things picked up for them quite a lot, And of course, then they knew that they were flying.
Trained South Vietnamese pilots took us 2.5 years, and then they desert.
Well, they get there. They hadn't been home for 2.5 years. Can you imagine? Some of those people had family. Most of them did, and they get back, and then they know they're back in their country, and they haven't seen their family in 2.5 years, and it took a while. Some of those guys, that was tough on them. They called it the VNAV, Vietnamese Air Force. They had jets, and they had a lot of helicopters there towards the end of it, and.
Supplied by us.
So everything was supplied by us.
Yeah.
Everything.
I don't know why we ever went there in the first place.
I can tell you my feelings on that.
Yeah, the French were defeated over there.
Yeah.
Dien Bien Phu, was it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And then we got mixed up in it. I don't know. Boy, it must have been... what's the worst thing you saw there, or...
Oh, it's... well, I got some papers there I just dug up. The year I was there, I think 8 or 9 pilots right in my company that got killed. One of them had gone to flight school with me. One guy, Donald Crumry, he was one of my co-pilots. He had just made aircraft commander, and I've got the accident report. I found that on the internet, by the way. We were on an insertion. He was just in front of me, and it was an accident. He didn't get shot up. It was just an aircraft accident. But anyway, the blade come down when the helicopter rolled, and it hit him in the top of the head, and he was dead, basically. When we loaded him in the helicopter, his eyes all rolled back, and I mean, he was dead. But we still run him as fast as we could down to Vinh Long, where there was a little bit of a hotel, and that's somebody that flew with you for a month in training, and then you turned him loose, and then a few weeks later, he's dead.
Yeah.
July 17, 1970.
You remember the date?
I remember that, and I can remember because we're sitting there. There's a helicopter rolled over. It's a turbine engine. All these UEs are jet engines. The blades are all broke off, but the engine's still whining a wicked noise, and it's on fire. Everybody's out. The crew chief, nobody else got hardly a scratch. It's just a rotor blade coming down where he was sitting, cut off the top of the cockpit and hit him in the back of the head. But the rounds are going off. All the rounds that are on that helicopter, the ammunition, it's fire. I mean, and that sounds like a real popcorn machine there. And you don't know where those rounds are going, but you got to get that guy.
Oh, geez.
So we get him, we load him in, and I remember the co-pilot. His name was Joe Golinsky. He came to see me about 10 years ago. Lives in New York, but he was dead. I remember seeing what was left of a mid-air collision, and nobody I knew had no idea. But I was just taken off from Canto Airfield, and I remember the tower saying, "We've got a mid-air," and I turned, because you just left there like 30 seconds earlier, and I look, and I can see a beaver on wheels. It was a Vietnamese airplane, come to find out later. At the time I didn't know. And it was in a big spiral coming down. And what happened, it lost part of a wing. But what had happened, it had climbed into a Huey. And of course the Huey don't spiral, because when the rotor blades come down, that dropped just like a rock.
Oh,
I never saw
right?
the Huey. It landed in the river. Well, of course, I think there was like 16 or 17 people killed. And there's not a thing you can do. You're there, and that just, there's so much aircraft activity that there's accidents. I mean, there's enough people get shot up and stuff, but there's accidents too, because there's just so many helicopters.
Did you meet anybody you knew from up here?
Yeah, I found out that Gary Saucier was in Tan An. That's a little village, a base, maybe 50 miles southwest of Saigon. So one afternoon we were released early, and I'm headed back, and I was an aircraft commander then, so I could pretty much, on the way home, a lot of times we didn't fly back together. We'd break up and go see the sights, which it was all the same. But anyway, I knew Gary was there, so I landed at the airfield. It was a place where you could refuel there. And I told the co-pilot, shut it down and fill it up, and I says, I'm going to run over this company headquarters here. So I walk in the company headquarters, there's a lieutenant there, and I says, I'm looking for a specialist Saucier. He says, well, over in the motor pool. He says, over behind that building over there. So I walk over, and I get over there, and I see this guy bent over, and from a distance I can see it's Gary Saucier. And I walked right up to him and just tapped him on the shoulder. And he got up and turned around, and I mean, he was surprised. I mean, the last person he expected to see was me. And he was coming home. I think he had like a month to go. I ran into Joel Dumond in the PX in Bearcat, I think it was. And I think it was Herman Pelletier I ran into just by accident,
Well, it must be quite something to see somebody
yeah, still, I mean, in
your hometown.
Yeah, it's quite something for sure. Yeah, Herman Pelletier I ran into, because he was stationed just outside of Bearcat. I remember that.
Were these guys all in the Air Force?
They were in the Army. Gary...
oh, you were in the Army yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Herman Pelletier and Joel both graduated with me. Okay. And, we're both in the same graduating class.
Okay, so you're in the Army Air Force.
It's called the Army, period. It's not Air Force. There used to be an Army Air Force a long time ago, and now the Army's got its own flight detachment. They're got nothing to do with the Air Force, no more than the Navy has anything to do with the Air Force. And the Army has their own aviation detachments.
So the Air Force, what do they have? Do they have helicopters too, or they mostly?
In Vietnam, I can tell you almost right to the numbers, because that's all available on the internet now. And since you asked me to do this, I've been doing some research. 10,000 some helicopters in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. 8,400 of them are Army. About 7,500 of them were Hueys, like what I flew. Can you imagine? That's over a period of quite a few years. To this day, for me and for a lot of people, not because I was an Army aviator, but when the thing that symbolizes the Vietnam War the most is a Huey helicopter.
Yeah.
I mean, anything you pick up, you watch the military channel, they talk Vietnam, there's a Huey in it somewhere. Yeah. It was a helicopter war. I'll tell you, down in the southern half of southern Vietnam, it's the only way you got around. Up north, they could get around. There was hills and mountains. They could use some tanks and stuff. Down where I was, there's just none of that.
Rice paddies?
Oh, rice paddies for miles and miles and miles.
So you're talking like a swamp then?
Oh yeah, swamp, and then we had swamp. We had the place called the U Minh Forest. Geez, that's a triple canopy jungle. You don't ever see the ground there ever. And then that's a bad place to be and a bad place to crash. And a lot of people that, disappeared there, they never saw them again. They get captured or whatever.
Were you there when they started to use Agent Orange to defoliate?
Well, I sprayed Agent Orange.
You did?
Around Agent Orange was used mostly like in combat, and they'd have an area where they'd want to kill, say, all the vegetation along a river or somewhere, but you'd use it around the bases because you'd want to kill the vegetation too. The biggest part of Agent Orange was sprayed with the C-130s or big aircraft, but some of it was done with helicopters, especially around bases and stuff. And we didn't know what it was. They didn't even call it Agent Orange, but the barrels were orange. I remember orange and red. and it was a defoliant, but we didn't call it Agent Orange at the time, and we didn't even know what it was. I never realized till about 5-6 years ago, you know, really what it was, but it's bad stuff.
Yeah. Well, I heard that they said that it was nothing. You know, Agent Orange, whatever they called it then, and you could even cook your food into the, you know, made utensils with the barrel there, and you could cook your food in there. I don't know if that's true.
Huh.
But certainly you guys didn't think it was anything at all.
You got to remember, everything was brought in, like when they'd spray Agent Orange out of an airfield, everything was brought in barrels. And I remember at the Vinlong airfield, I can remember, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of barrels of that piled up at the end of an airstrip where the airplanes would go and fill up. It was, you know, there's no other way to get it there. If you didn't bring it in 55-gallon drums, that's the only way you could transport it in the aircraft.
So how did you put that into you had a spraying machine?
Yeah, we had a UE. They had a UE that was the battalion that I was in, the 214th Combat Aviation Battalion. They had one UE that they had set up, had a tank in it, and it had a set of booms, and not unlike a small helicopter you'd see today that they spray potatoes with.
Okay.
And it was pressurized, and that was bad stuff. You know, that didn't take a month to work there. Oh, geez, that was bad stuff. I look back on it now. At the time, we didn't think it was bad stuff. It was just another thing we were doing, you know.
Yeah.
I think I only ever did it a couple times.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And I don't think I ever got an actual contact, but how do you know?
Huh.
You know, but somebody did, because I mean, nobody had gloves. I mean, we had a hard time to have the right flight gear, you know, most of the time. You asked about some of the worst things. There's so many things, Mark, but I can remember now. I can remember an OV-10 Bronco, which was a Navy aircraft, a close support fighter, and for some reason they had to bail out of it. And it was way up in, it was not far from where Gary Associate was there. It'll come to me. Planery, I can't remember the name. Anyway, they called, and they parachuted out, and then I remember this outfit we were with, that we had a major, no, he was a lieutenant colonel, and he was flying the overhead ship, which was like a command and control ship, and he says, I'll pick up the two pilots. You could see him off in the distance, the parachutes coming down, and maybe it was 2-3 miles away. And
so these guys were helicopter.
No, they were airplane pilots that had bailed out of and I can't remember why. They had a malfunction of some kind. Well, they bailed out and they're coming down. Everything's fine.
But you guys ever bail out?
No, there's no, Army pilots don't wear parachutes.
Really?
You don't have time. I mean, not in a UE helicopter. I mean, how are you going to bail out at 300 feet?
So you're never too high.
I flew for weeks at a time over there, never got 600-700 feet high.
Okay.
See, it was two trains of thought there. When you're flying over the enemy, you either fly right on the deck, you're awful close, but just for a short period of time, poof, you're going by, or you fly high enough so that you're out of small arms, which is about 3,000 feet. 1,500 feet, you could still get damage if you get hit small arms. And small arms would be like an AK-47, which is like an M16 to us as far as the ammunition. Occasionally, the enemy had 50 cal. 50 cal, the bullet's about that long, and the tracers are green. And when they shoot at you with that at night, it looks like buckets of green coming, because every fifth round is on fire per se, and you can see it coming. But when you can see it, supposedly it won't hit you, because the tip of a tracer doesn't burn.
Oh.
But I'm going to tell you, it still makes you feel like you want to get behind something. But where are you going to get behind?
Yeah.
But even the 60 cal fire, that's red. And I mean, it was great that they had that, because you'd see it. Because if they're shooting at night, all you hear, you don't know where it's coming from. But when they're shooting at night and they get the tracers, you see where it's coming from.
What's the purpose of a tracer?
So you can see where you're shooting. You're shooting and you can see your rounds going.
Okay.
Okay?
So the guy who's being shot at can
that's right.
also see it.
That's right. And getting back to that, the two Navy pilots, they're coming down and they land. Plainer Reeds was where that happens. Okay? Big, like a swamp area with high grass. And the helicopter, that command control ship gets over there. I didn't see it actually happen, but it happened when I was right there. The second guy gets down and he's still got his chute hitched to him, and he's kind of pulling the cords and getting ready. The helicopter comes right in, of course, 110 mile an hour wind under a Huey. So he comes right in right next to the pilot and just sets it down. If he'd have come in slow and hovered in slow, might have got away with that. But he come in real fast, that wind hit the ground, inflated the chute right up through the rotor blade. The helicopter rolled on its side. Nobody in the helicopter get killed, but guess what happened to the pilot?
Oh,
Yeah, imagine survive an accident like that, not a scratch on him, get killed because he went up through a rotor blade.
so the thing to do there would have been to wait until he's unhooked or something?
The thing to do there, yeah, would have been that. And
Of course, you're
the guy
anxious.
that flew every day there like we did wouldn't have done that. And the guy flying the Huey he was a guy that flew like maybe once or twice a month, you know, and because you had to fly every so often, even if you were a major or a lieutenant colonel or colonel, to keep current. And it was unfortunate. He didn't do it on purpose, but that should have never happened. You know, that was just terrible.
So how about the other guy? The two of them?
The other guy was further away, so he of course he saw that all happen. And of course of course the helicopter rolled on its side.
So then all these guys had to be rescued.
Yeah, there was 5 on the. Remember that there was 5 on the Huey, and then the 1 Navy pilot.
So what happens to a guy like that who does something like that?
I don't know that anything much happened there. A lot of mistakes made, you know,
Yeah,
in the war
of
like
course.
that and everything. But I'm sure he remember that the rest of his life.
Yeah, he didn't do it on purpose.
And you know what? The guy was probably, I think he was a lieutenant colonel. I can't remember. But basically there was a lack of experience. You know, you're just not doing it often enough. And there's some things there that's pretty touchy.
Yeah, that's for sure. They have a monsoon season over there, don't they?
It's reversed. In the northern part of South Vietnam, when they're having their monsoon, in the southern part, it's the dry season.
Really?
Oh yeah. And
How big is that with South Vietnam? How long?
You know, I don't really know, but it must be 700-800 miles anyway.
Really?
I don't think any more than that. It might be a little more than that. I could tell if I went on a map. I never got.
It didn't seem to me that it was that long.
Oh yeah, it's that long.
Yeah, really?
Up to Da Nang and stuff is from Saigon must have been 500 miles, and then from Saigon south you could go another 250 before you get to the U Minh Forest. So there's 750. So it's at least that. Not very wide.
No.
No, not very wide.
But so you have a monsoon there.
Monsoon. Hey, listen. During we call it the rainy season. It rained every day, and rained hard. But you know the war don't stop because it's raining, and the war don't stop because the wind's blowing. Not for Army aviation anyway. I mean, I flew in some winds there that didn't even make sense. I mean, I flew 60-mile-an-hour winds. It's no big deal. It's not dangerous. It's just you don't go anywhere very fast if you're going against the wind. And if you're going with it, you go like hell. But sooner or later, you got to take account for fuel. And what was hard was handling the aircraft when you got it on the ground and hovering. You couldn't turn. You didn't have enough power to turn at a hover. You had to do everything straight ahead, go sideways. If you had to go over there 100 yards, you couldn't turn and hover that way. You had to hover sideways. The way it was, you know. But the monsoon, it rained so much. And at the beginning of it there, we had ditches around our compound where we stayed. The ditches were like 2 feet, 3 feet wide, about 2 feet deep. In a half an hour, they'd be full. I mean, rain. And foggy and bad weather. And that was all right in the daytime. At night, that was.
Oh, that must have been something.
Oh yeah, that was taxing.
So how long does that last?
4 or 5 months.
Really?
Yeah. And it's funny because you see the rice paddies, and when they're right full, in the middle of the monsoon, it's squares and they're right full of water. It look like gigantic swimming pools, and they're everywhere. There's hundreds of miles of that. In the dry season, those rice paddies, when you come in to land in them, it's dust, dry, just as dry as can be. But see, they raise the rice when it's wet. So sometimes you'd see those paddies and you'd look and it would be all green. It'd look lush green. Well, that was the rice coming up through about this high above the water, and below that there's a foot of water. You drop people off in there, and they're in the water, and it's quite something.
So during the dry season, that would all dry up?
Yeah, you'd still have showers, thunderstorms,
But I mean, the rice
Oh yeah,
paddies.
I may have a few of the pictures I got that shows that. I mean, really dry.
Isn't that
That's,
something? Yeah.
you know.
Now, the weather was always hot and humid.
During the monsoon, it would be pretty cold. I mean, you wear your flight jacket. Of course, you got to remember that a lot of our flying, we took the doors off. We didn't have time to be frigging around opening and closing doors when you're doing insertions. You know, it takes time to do that. We'd fly with the.
Well, yeah, what we've seen on TV.
Oh yeah, I mean, they wouldn't even put any belts on. I mean, I've done insertions, have 4 hanging out one side, 4 the other. You'd be 600 feet in the air, and they're still standing on the skids, hanging on one hand. That was cool back then. I wouldn't do it, not today anyway. But and then we'd even take our doors off, the pilot's doors, because you could see a little bit better. But what happened after a while, we got a directive to not do that, because what happens, there was so much pressure on the airframes, and not having the doors in place, things would warp a little, and then the doors wouldn't close good, and actually you'd do damage to the airframes. You know.
So you had doors for the pilot area, and
co-pilot door, yeah.
Because what we see right through the helicopter usually.
Oh yeah, and you know, like I said, we didn't have any seats. The only 2 seats we had was right in the corner in the back, one for the gunner, one for the crew chief, and a lot of my guys didn't even have the seat because it took up too much room. They sat on ammo boxes with a cushion, and that's the way they wanted it, you know. And when the troops would pile in, I mean, they sit on the floor everywhere, and I mean, nobody's got belts. And I remember one day coming back, and the company control center called and said, we have a passenger to pick up at Hotel 3. Hotel 3 is the big, busy heliport in downtown Saigon. Hundreds and hundreds of helicopters a day land there. But you couldn't land there and shut down, because that's where all the generals flew out of. If the president was there. And I mean, if you went in there, you had to have a reason to go. When you went, there was colored pads. If you were picking up a general, it would be on this pad. If you were picking up a colonel, it would be on a different colored one. You know, it was pretty high tech there. So they said, you got to stop Hotel 3 and pick up a passenger. So we flew in. It was kind of cool, because you didn't get to do that. And this is right downtown Saigon there. I mean, flying right up the streets, you know. And we land and we pick up 2 people. This one guy, I didn't look at him too close, and he hops in and he had another guy with him. And we're getting along, and Schrader, he was my crew chief. He was a good crew chief. He says, hey, Frenchie, he says, we got a 2-star here. I said, what do you mean we got a 2-star? And of course, this guy don't have a headset, so he can't hear us. You can't hardly talk to the guy next to you if you don't have an intercom. He said, that's a 2-star. That's a Marine 2-star. I had a Marine 2-star general sitting on the floor of my helicopter. You know, we'd have known we was picking up a general. Yeah. We'd have had a seat somewhere. But you know what? That didn't bother him. It didn't. You know, it didn't faze him a bit. I mean, this guy was a warrior. You could, just looking at him, you could tell he was probably about 35 40 years old, and you know, he'd probably been in the service 18, 20 years, and he was that didn't bother him a bit.
Most guys I see that they're from the valley. They were named Frenchie, right?
Yeah, a lot of that. And with me, you know, I got to tell you a story about that, because everything I got here, the yearbooks and everything, it said Gary Frenchie. You know, and along about in the mid-70s, I was doing an air ambulance flight into Logan Airport for Central Maine Flying Service. A kid had cut his finger off on a wood splitter. And I used to fly part-time for him, and I got a call and they said, hey, can you take this guy? It was a Sunday evening. They said, can you take this guy down to Boston? He cut his finger off, and they've got it in a bag on ice, and they got to get him down there. He was 16 years old. I said, sure. Well, I go to the airport and get the twin-engine airplane ready, and the ambulance shows up, and there's this guy, 16 years old, and they had him pretty well drugged up. He wasn't no pain.
So where were you then?
I was in Old Town. This was after I'd been back from the war, 4 or 5 years. And this guy's all wrapped up, and he's got a bag. Well, guess what? The finger's in the bag. Okay? So I put him in, sit him right in the seat with me, and take him down to Boston. And we're down there to Boston, and of course, when you're doing an air ambulance like that, when you call, whether it's Boston or Portland, I don't care where, you call and you tell them that you're a life flight, all of a sudden, you've got priority. I mean, they turn the airlines aside. I mean, you're coming in because you've got somebody that needs a medical. And they knew I was coming. They had an ambulance. About 5 miles out, I could see the ambulance, the lights, you know what. Logan's a pretty busy airport for a game warden pilot now, let me tell you. So anyway, I'm in there, and I drop this guy off, I go get a hot chocolate, and I taxi to leave. By then, it's about midnight, and I'm taxiing, and I'm talking to ground control, and about then says, hey, Frenchie, how are you? Now, to this day, I don't know who that was, but that's somebody that I flew with in Vietnam or that went to flight school with me, because ain't nobody in Maine that
Yeah.
told you that, you know?
No.
And that's all. I just never, of course, you can't just judge back and forth on the, you know, when you're talking on Boston Tower or Boston Control, but he knew it was me, the voice. He said, "Hey, Frenchie," you know, and I'll never forget that.
I interviewed Lionel Lavoie there a month ago. He was a radio man. He's a Marine,
Yeah.
and he had an antenna. And he said he was a prime target all the time. I mean, they picked you out because you couldn't correspond anymore with
Yeah,
them.
they knew that, yeah.
Now, what was it with helicopter pilots? What was your life expectancy there, or your percentage of survival?
I can tell you that my class, I got it written down, but I think I can remember. My class, my graduating flight school class was 150. I think it was 152 pilots graduated in class 6941. 17 get killed in Vietnam. Two of them, one of those guys I roomed with for 3 months. You know, the U.S. Army lost 13 or 1,400 pilots there. Of course, you got to remember that 85% of the helicopters in Vietnam were Army. I mean, the Navy had some, the Marines had some, but I mean, it was a UE war, and then most of the UEs were, I mean, 90% of the UEs were Army. The Navy had a few, the older models, Marines had some. The youngest pilot that got shot in Vietnam was 19 years old and 3 months, I think it was.
You mean shot? He just
Get killed.
get killed on the ground or in the air?
Get killed, yeah.
Oh, so you're coming in there, people are shooting at you.
Oh, geez, I mean, that's what you're there for. I mean, if they're not shooting at you, that means there's nobody there, and you've wasted your time. What the hell are you going to bring troops there for? You know, sometimes you're moving a battalion of troops. I mean, that's a lot of helicopters, and sometimes you're making 3 and 4 trips. And say you're 5 helicopters and you got 14 guys in each helicopter, and you do that 5 times, that's a lot of troops put in there in about a 15, 20-minute period. And it's real, you've got to have a lot of patience, because when you're coming in and say you're in a trail formation, 5 helicopters, and you're getting down here and you're the lead helicopter, and you're coming to settle down to let your guys, you got to remember, you got 4 other helicopters that are behind you and up higher. You got to leave room for them. They can't just stop up here 200 feet and turn around. Everybody, once you're in there, you're committed, you're going. And then sometimes it seems like forever to unload, and you're sitting there and you're unloaded, but you can't move because the trail ship's not down yet.
Oh,
and you're talking, everybody's talking, you're all on the same frequency. And I mean, you can hear a lot of times you went in, you didn't get shot at, but I mean, I can't remember how many times, but I mean, I took like 40 or 50 hits that I knew of in the helicopter.
Oh.
I mean, oh yeah, I had a crew chief that got shot in the helmet. It came into, if I remember this right, came in right here, hit the helmet, went around and came back out. And I mean, can you imagine? It followed the liner of the helmet. That round had to come from a distance. It didn't have as much power left in it, evidently. I mean, it burnt him pretty good. But I mean, you know how close he come to dying? You know, and I had a rudder pedal shot out one time. You know, I mean, I'm pushing on it, and geez, it's bending. Of course, that's why you got a co-pilot, you know. Matter of fact, I was a co-pilot then. That was when maybe the second month I was there. And, but you get used to it, but the younger you are, it doesn't seem to bother you as much. We wore what they call we call it a chicken plate. It was a flak vest, and they gave you one. Every pilot had one of those. Guess what, for 8 or 9 months, we didn't lug them because you had to carry them to the flight line. It was about a quarter of a mile, and they weighed a lot, so most of us didn't bring it. That's crazy, you know. And then the last month or two, some guys would bring 2, theirs and somebody else's. They'd put one in the bubble of the helicopter, because a lot of times that's where you'd get hit. And they'd lay it right in the bubble. The seat that you sat in was armor plated to a certain extent.
Now, after Vietnam, were you completely clear? A lot of guys stay with this and they have problems
It's
for the rest of
you
their
know,
lives.
all I can say about that is different strokes for different folks. I mean, some things that are not a big deal bother people in a big way. Some things that are a big deal didn't bother some people, because everybody's got a different level of what they can accept, not accept. And I mean, yeah, hey, I know I've got some friends that, I've got some friends and relatives that it's bothered. Probably for a year. I mean, when I'd hear a boom or you'd get your attention. What bothered me a lot there for 3 or 4 years, because we didn't have computers back then, but when you'd hear of somebody that you'd gone to flight school with, and then you find out 4 years later that he burned to death. Jimmy Johnson, I'll never forget, when I found that out, he was a colored guy that I had roomed with some, and he burnt in a crash in Sauk Trang, and things like that. That bothers you. I mean, it's people that you broke bread with, and you went to, when you go to flight school with somebody for 48 weeks, you get to know people pretty well.
Yeah, and there's a closeness there that you can't find anywhere else.
There's camaraderie there of pilots. It's I don't know how to explain that. It's really something. And like, I got something I can show you here. Like, just 1 month in Vietnam, it'll show you how many pilots get killed and where, and the accident reports. It's amazing.
So you didn't have any dreams or nightmares, or sometimes?
I might have had some the first year, but not a great
even
amount.
Thinking how close something happened, and
I thought of that. I mean, I thought of that last spring when I stepped off the back of my dock there. I mean, you don't know when you're going, but I mean, I had some. I lost an engine over there and put the helicopter down. Nothing left of it, but none of us got a scratch on it. And I mean, really, we could have been hurt bad there, but everything happened about right. And like I say, it took a lot of rounds. I mean, a lot of times you didn't know it. Most of the times when it hit, you don't feel it hitting a helicopter that weighs 8,000 or 9,000 pounds loaded. I mean, it can go, but sometimes you'd hear it. You'd hear a ting noise,
Some bullet going through.
Oh, I had a crew chief named Ballard, and he was sitting on the floor. We'd picked up some troops and we're taking off, and I can't remember. I wasn't the lead ship. I remember that. And all of a sudden they hollered, "Hey, Frenchie, they got me. And a round had come up through the floor, gone through his thigh, through his arm, and out through the helicopter. Of course, you got to remember, that got shot maybe like 300 feet, so it's still got a lot of power there. And we had a bunch of Vietnamese on board, and then this guy, he's 6'5" and he's tough. And so the gunner's helping him out. I mean, the blood's everywhere. And you can see the hole in the floor. And I remember the Vietnamese that we had picked up, the troops, they're all backing away from the hole, like there's going to be another one come through the same hole.
Yeah.
But see, that's what you're dealing with over there.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And I remember him saying, Ballard, that he kept saying, "Frenchie, it burns." It was, I guess, a wicket. Can you imagine? It went up through his thigh. And you know what? 2 months later, he was back flying.
Is that right?
Went right through the meat of the thigh. It didn't hit a bone. He lucked out there. And
boy, oh boy.
Yeah. And
you're with this all day long, every day.
And then there was always a thing at night. You come back, and then you'd hear that one ship didn't come back, and then maybe they were all right. They crashed, or maybe. And then I remember a guy named Dumond went to flight school with me, and he got killed. They got shot up, and everybody got killed in that accident.
Did you pick up people that were really bad there? Okay. Like some kid who was dying right in front of you there?
Yeah, I can tell you that there's a program every so often on the military channel about dust off, which is the medical evacuation in Vietnam, and that's the Huey helicopter was originally designed for air ambulance because they found in Korea that it worked pretty good. Well, you don't know how many thousands and thousands of lives that a helicopter saved in Vietnam. I mean, in the tens of thousands. And so what would happen, dust off, there was a few of them based around. Originally they were for the American troops, but then, you got to take care of your counterparts too. They're fighting helping you out. So, but the dust off, they just couldn't handle it. There was just way more. I mean, there were just not enough medical helicopters. That's the one with the Red Crosses. So we flew a lot. I can remember so many times flying people, and most of them were Vietnamese troops. I flew a fair amount of Americans, Vietnamese troops, and I mean, some of them were dead, some of them were almost dead. And I've seen the blood so bad on the floor of the helicopter, you had to rinse it with pails and pails of water.
Holy geez.
And I remember landing at My Tho, which is a third or fourth largest city in Vietnam, way down south, and there was a hospital there for the Vietnamese. It was a heliport. You could put maybe 8 or 10 helicopters in there easily. And you'd land there, and they had two of these little trucks where they could put 4 stretchers in them. And you'd land there, and there'd be 15, 20 people laying on the ground in stretchers. I mean, they just only had two trucks. And when you're bringing them in 8 or 9 at a time, for a while there, they just can't furnish. And I remember coming in one time and landing and just sitting there, and they're unloading these guys to put them on. And some of them could walk, and I look up and I see this Jeep pull in and back up and back right over a guy laying in a stretcher.
Holy jeez.
I never forget that.
Oh.
I never forget it. And I mean, that was unbelievable.
Oh. You were there a year. You said something a while ago about coming back, leaving here and coming back within half an hour.
Let's see if I can get that straight. I left Fort Kent 3:30 in the morning on the 16th of January, and I got back at 2 o'clock in the morning on the 16th of January.
Wow.
I've gone an hour and a half, less than a year, I guess, how you'd want to look at it. I never took an R&R over there. And the last 2 weeks you didn't have to fly. That was, some guys are 2 weeks to go. They get pretty nervous. Okay, and like I say, different for everybody's got a different,
Well, we've heard of a guy, his last day there, and you get killed.
Oh, that's happened. But the last day I was there, we had to fly 120 miles to the Elk Processing Center. I flew the helicopter to the Elk Processing Center. I never thought I'd ever see you again. Not Fort Kent.
Yeah.
Then I ended up flying it for quite a few years. The medical thing, it was, you just can't imagine how many people we moved that, I remember picking up, listen to this, I got to Vietnam, I'd been there about a month, and we were doing a resupply mission, and all of the Vietnamese troops had two American advisors, a commissioned officer and a non-commissioned officer, signed with them, like a company of a couple hundred or whatever. They'd have 1 or 2 or 3 Americans. So you'd bring them in supplies because they would eat different food than the Vietnamese. So I remember flying in this lieutenant, and I remember him talking to me because on the back of my helmet I had written Fort Kent, Maine on it, because you were picking up people, and and a lot of guys would do that. So I remember flying this lieutenant in because he was brand new, was going in. That was his first assignment in Vietnam. He's not a lot older than I was. And 4 days later, we went in there to bring some resupplies, and we flew his body out. Oh. And I'd only been there about 2 weeks, and he got killed within a couple hours after we dropped him off.
Oh.
And they had him wrapped in a bamboo rug, like a mat.
Okay.
They had him wrapped in that, tied on both ends like you'd tie a fish there. And that didn't smell very good. And I had to fly him all the way back to Ton Chinook.
You knew it was him?
I knew it was him.
Yeah.
And then when we get there, there's a morgue there. You drop him in. Well, when you bring in a U.S. casualty, then they bring him in, and then somebody's got to go in and identify. It's got to be an officer. Guess who gets to go to do that? Oh, then I knew where I was then. I'd only been there about 3 weeks or something.
Oh, geez. So you saw a lot of blood, a lot of horrible things.
I remember picking up two Americans that were advisors also, and one of them, how they killed him, they pulled his eyes out. That's how the Viet Cong got a hold of him, and they
tortured him.
They pulled his eyes out, and of course they left him there because they wanted everybody else to see that.
Oh yeah.
That just made us a little.
Was he dead there?
Oh yeah. He was dead. That was down in Ben Tre Province. I remember that pretty well.
How was the morale?
Morale was awesome.
Really?
Oh yeah. When it was time to go home, I saw guys cry, and a year's a long time.
Yeah.
And the best part is you flew every day. Now, see, you didn't have to fly. You could fly within reason as much as you wanted to, but you could get a day off or 2 a week sometimes, and if you want to. But you know what? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And when you're young, you fly. So the month of November 1970, right before I come home, I flew all 30 nights, 30 straight nights. I got the record.
And when you're talking about flying, there it's a mission.
That was Nighthawk, and Nighthawk I show you later if we don't run out of tape here. Nighthawk was a package that we had with a minigun that would shoot 6,000 rounds a minute, mounted on the side of the Huey with a big Xeon light. And we had the very first one of those in Vietnam. General Electric put it on one of our helicopters, and I flew it. I did that for 30 straight nights, month of November. I did it for like 4 months, but month of November I did it. No, it's not good weather every night there, okay? But that's what I wanted to do.
So this light, you could see where you're going.
Yeah, and it was hard for them to shoot at you because the light, they could never tell the angle, okay? This light was about this big around. The guy sat behind it that had double grips, and he had a button he could pull, and when he could pinpoint the light, or he could open it up. And I'm telling you, you could have played soccer under that light. I mean, that was wicked bright. Then the gun that's alongside of it is a General Electric minigun that shoots at 6,000 rounds a minute. You can't shoot it for a minute because you'll burn the barrel. It'll melt. But you shoot it about 4 or 5 seconds. You let it cool 3 or 4 seconds. You shoot it another 4 or 5 second burst. A 4 or 5 second burst, you take a 30-foot sampan, which is a wooden homemade boat that the Viet Cong used to move supplies. If you hit it in the middle, a 5 second burst cuts it in half just like a chainsaw. And it just won't like that. And I flew that for 600 and some hours. I mean, I did that. That was my thing. And to this day, I talk to some of the guys, and they do it for a month. That was enough. Some guys didn't want to do it at all, and nobody had to be forced because there was always somebody that wanted to do some of that stuff. And I did it. I enjoyed it. It was something different. You ran your own show.
So you come out of there. You land in San Francisco.
Nope. I come out of there, and I'll never forget that when we broke ground in Benoit. I mean, they're the biggest yells you ever heard in that airplane. We went to Japan. We fueled. We went to Anchorage, Alaska, and we had a 6-hour layover. And I get out at Anchorage, and right as we're landing, before I get out, I see this little lake there right alongside the airport. There's hundreds of airplanes tied, little airplanes tied on skis there. It's in the winter on the ice, and there's some all around it called Lake Hood. I didn't know that at the time. But I was coming home to get married, because if I wasn't, I'd probably get off right there. That looked like a pretty good deal to me. And I've waited 30-some years, and I went back 2 years ago, first time. And I went back again last summer.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Then we left Anchorage and landed at Fort Dix, an out process. While I was there 2 days, I found out my cousin Jimmy was in training there along with a couple other guys from Fort Kent, I think Bob Moran. And I found out where they was, and I went right to their company area and went into the office. They went and got them, and of course those guys weren't training. They were saluting everybody. If a dog walked by, they were saluting them, And the first thing they did is salute me, and they come in and they see who it was, And that would have been in January of '71.
Jim Dumond. So.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that something? Maybe we'll look at some of your stuff from Vietnam. Okay, this is
this here.
Where are you?
Well, I'm taking the picture.
Oh,
that's my crew, and you never had a better crew. This guy right here in the middle, his name is Wayne Schultz. The gun that he's leaning against, you look, there's 6 barrels on that. And you see there's a trigger up above there where you can handle to shoot.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that shoots 6,000 rounds a minute. When that shoots, and you're the pilot sitting up here in this door, and the window's down, the flame out of that gun is 12 feet out.
Oh.
And the first night we used it, burned all the hair off the back of my neck. We didn't know what we were getting into. But when he'd shoot forward, he couldn't shoot any further forward than that. But the flame, it felt like you could have reached out with a hot dog and cook it.
Holy.
So then they designed a Nomex thing to put around our neck. Either that or to keep the window up. And you see the light?
I see the light there.
Yeah, the light, that's that Xeon light. See, there was an outfit that had something like that before us. What they had like 10 seal beams on a frame, and but it didn't work even 1/4 as good as this. And that was my Huey right there. That's still the same ship. You can see the door, the big door is taken off completely. And that's how we flew it.
Yeah, that's what we see on TV there.
Now on the other side of this gun, on the other side of this helicopter, we had a 50 caliber machine gun. That wasn't authorized, something we did on our own, because a 50 caliber shook the aircraft when it would shoot. It's such a big round, it shook it so much you couldn't read the instruments. And it was hard on the airframe, so we only did it about 2 months, and we took it off. I get pictures of that somewhere else.
So you're flying around Vietnam, they're going on their different missions. And
I did this for 4 months, 4.5 months.
And somebody's shooting all the time?
Oh, yeah, that's what you're there for. See, anything that
this guy was shooting.
The guy in the middle, Wayne Schultz, that was his baby. The guy on the left, I just can't remember his name. What a good crew chief. I can tell you something. The guy on the right,
with a Coke bar can.
Yes, now I can't remember his name. It'll come to me. He died of an overdose of cocaine, and I found him.
Right there?
Yeah, no, right in Vietnam. And we had that, and unfortunately it was very readily available there, and some people would get into it, and every so often the officers would do a sweep of the enlisted men, and you hated to do that because, you know, those enlisted men flew at you every day, and you were no better than they were, but some of them had a problem. We had a pilot that we found was on drugs over there, and they grounded him after a while. Well, anyway, this guy here, we got one night, they get woken up, hey, you gotta go. And I go to wake up my crew, and I go to him, and he's at a little desk in his little area, and he's bent over. And when I put my hand on him, I knew right then something wrong. He was stiff as a board, and he was dead. And he'd probably been dead 4 or 5 hours.
From cocaine.
Cocaine, yeah. You know what? I just now looking at this, I can't even remember his name.
Oh boy, yeah.
But that was sad. But anyway, that helicopter right there, that brought. Boy, I'll tell you, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong didn't like this operation. Because at night, you didn't ask questions. If you saw something move on the water, you shot.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because that's how they move their supplies at night.
Oh, yeah.
Waterways. And I mean, there was nights that we had like 40 or 50 confirmed kills. In other words, here's what would happen. We'd find an area where all of a sudden a bunch of troops had come in for the enemy. And we'd engage them, and then we'd call in airstrikes. And then the next day, they'd fly in troops, right, to finish it up, and they'd say, well, when we got here, we found 42 killed by air, which would have been us, and then there was another 110 that we killed after we got here. Guess what? We probably the ones that got them all.
Yeah.
But how do you know? You don't see them.
That's a note.
Oh, this is a sad story. That's why I put this in. Let me focus. Okay, you look at this. See the little kid?
Yeah.
And he's got a little kid on his shoulder, on his back, piggyback. You see his feet
Oh,
sticking out?
yes.
That's an orphanage right there. And there's some more kids to the right. You see them standing just to the right of the picture?
Okay.
That's an orphanage, and it was an area where we used to land and resupply a couple American advisors there. And I came back in there about a month later, and the place was flattened. It had been mortared. It killed dozens and dozens of kids. You know, and what did those kids ever do to anybody? But, you know, that didn't make any difference to the...
And what's that, a river behind that?
No, that's a...
Oh, that's a wall.
Orphanage.
Oh, that's a wall.
Yeah, that's a wall. That's
Oh, it looked like a river to me.
Yeah. Sometimes we'd land there and we'd always have some candy or something. And I've got some other pictures, I don't know if they're in here, but we'd give them candy, you know.
What a life for those kids.
Oh, hey, I never saw anybody with shoes. They didn't have any,
No shoes.
shoes.
No, yeah.
you know. That there is the Bob Hope Show, 1970, December, I think it was December 18, I can't remember, something like that. It was about
Oh, look at all them.
the ones in blue that you can see, that's all people from a hospital.
Okay.
Okay, that year Bob Hope had Ann Margaret, Johnny Bench, the Gold Diggers. Remember the Gold Diggers?
Yeah.
They had them. Lola Falana, she was a singer.
Yeah.
I can't remember who else. But anyway, what happened? Not everybody can go to this thing because they're you know. So what they would do, they would pick 4 enlisted men and 1 officer from every company. And here was December, and I was the senior pilot in my company at 20 years old, and I got to go. And I took 4 enlisted men with me.
Now I see guys climbing up the pole.
Oh, they stayed there, watched the show the whole day. Hey, we sat there for 3 hours before the show started.
Holy
You know,
mackerel.
do you remember watching the Bob Hope Christmas special for years?
Oh,
and
yeah,
years
yeah,
and
yeah,
years?
yeah, yeah.
Just unbelievable what he did.
That must have, you know, made everybody happy.
Oh yeah, it was, you know, and a lot of the people there were in the same boots as I was, because it went by seniority basically. You know, I mean, if you just got there, well, they'd send somebody that was been there a long time or getting ready to go home. And he did that quite a few different places.
Oh
in
yeah,
Vietnam,
yeah.
you know,
Look how flat the land is, huh?
behind, yeah, that's looking to the south.
It ain't flat.
That's in Ben 1. Okay, this is just another picture. It's got nothing to do with Vietnam, but I threw it in because it's worth it. You see that round circle in the stream?
Yeah?
Now you have a hard look at that because you'd never see that in your life again. I happened to have a camera. I was a warden pilot, and I was down around Brownville, and I coming back from research, and I said, what in the world is that? And what that was, it had been real cold for a couple of days, and a piece of ice had formed on the stream, and then it let go and it floated downstream, and there was a real pointed rock in the river, and it rode up onto this pointed rock, and then the current started turning it, and it would rub against the shore like a wheel, and
Okay.
it made itself a perfect circle. You know.
I knew that wasn't Vietnam
No,
when I
but
saw
I found that I get so much. of
when
this
I saw
stuff.
the snow there. Holy mackerel!
But that's that's all the slides I put in there, Doc, because I got 200-300, and you could look at that for a week.
I can see that.
Okay, this is the amount of Hueys that served in Vietnam.
7,000?
7,000. This is how many didn't come home. 3,300.
Almost half.
And that's how many pilots flying Hueys get killed, and that's how many crew chiefs and gunners get killed. About the same amount.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Wow. T'es chanceux d'être rendu ici.
This is 1 month in Vietnam from 7/8/70 to not even a month. Like what, 18 days? That's how many people get killed right here. Different accidents. Got the date, what type of aircraft they were flying. You see this one right here? Donald Allen Crumry,
Yeah.
335th Assault Helicopter Company. That's the guy that I flew back to the rotor blade hit. And I just found this the other day.
Oh.
This is what they had on the
Oh, that's
on the
him.
web. That's him. That's all the statistics to that. And then look what it says here. Witness was Gary Dumond. Well, he wasn't a witness. I hauled him to the hospital. Of course, he was gone.
Oh, you found that on the
I
internet?
found that. I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Your name on there.
Yeah. And then tells the accident, you know, on the whole 9 yards.
Isn't that something? Now, over here we have pictures. This is when you left for...
That's when I graduated flight school. Gone with Jenga.
Holy boy. T'avais 19 ans, là, toi?
Yeah,
So that was in the St. John Valley Times.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. Now this picture here...
That's in Vietnam.
Is that you?
Yep.
Oh. Tes culottes sont pas trop bien pressées.
No, that was a flight suit.
Oh, that's your helicopter again.
Yeah, that's just one of, yeah. They all look the same.
Yeah, we saw that. Does it, I can't read, does it have the same thing
Yeah,
on
24. It says,
Yeah.
Cowboy 24.
Yeah,
That's the same thing right there.
okay. Oh, yeah.
Gary Associate, when I went and saw him.
You had somebody, it was your camera?
Yes, my camera, and I can't remember who I got. Somebody there that was just standing there.
So Gary Sochi's on the left.
Yeah,
Between you're on the right.
Yeah.
Boy, that must have been something, huh?
it was really something.
To see somebody from,
This here is that's in my little hooch, and that's a Viet Cong flag. That's you don't buy that down the supermarket there. I get that right where it counts, and I still got that here somewhere.
you still have
Yeah.
that? Viet Cong flag. Hey, mon, t'as dit.
It's just another one that's I'd probably been there 7 or 8 months when that picture. I think that's about August or something.
Huh.
That's that other gun on the other side of the gunship I told you about that shot the 50 caliber bullets, and 50 caliber bullets is that's big stuff.
It would shake the helicopter.
Oh yeah, oh it'd shake. You couldn't even read the gauges.
Wow. So you'd, and this is it right here.
This is about 30 years old actually. I built that right after I got home from Vietnam. That's an H model U. That's basically what I flew right there. This one has got the seats in it. We had all the seats out. Designed to carry a crew of 4, a pilot, a co-pilot, a gunner, and a crew chief, and then 10 American soldiers, which is about 16 Vietnamese because they're quite a lot smaller.
You built that when you
Yeah,
got
I
here?
built that a long time ago, and I found that the other day. That's this helicopter. This had 1,400 horsepower. There's a jet engine driving that, a Lycoming engine.
Ah. Now, what are these
Boy, I'm going to try to tell you there.
these medals here that interests me because
Some of these I've looked at in 15 or 20 years.
the one right here on the left
This
corner,
here's a Distinguished Flying Cross, and I actually have 2 awards of that. I'm pretty proud of that. And one of the awards I got after I'd been home about 6 months. I got a manila envelope one day, open it up, and it was a second award of the Distinguished Flying Cross. The one in the middle here is the Air Medal, and I have 50 awards of that. You got 1 award of the Air Medal for every 25 combat hours. That's a bronze star.
So hold it there. 25 combat hours.
For every 25 combat hours, you got what they call an oak leaf cluster, or a different, another award of the Air Medal. Well, you don't wear 50 Air Medals, so what they do is they'll put a little number 50 on it, which I got and I haven't put, but I've got the citation back here.
So you had 50 of those?
50, yeah, 50 of them. This is a bronze star.
50 times 25 hours.
It's 50 divided, yes, and that, which comes out to 1,400 hours of flight time.
Oh, okay. See, Victor.
Yeah. The other one that's really something here.
Well, what's that red one there?
That's a bronze star.
Bronze star, which is given for what?
For valor.
Okay.
Yeah. This one here is really something because most people, I guess, never even heard of it. And this came right directly from the government of South Vietnam, and it's a Vietnam Cross of Gallantry with a silver star, which is equivalent to our silver star. And there's what came with it, but you can see it's all, except for my name and the rank and the Social Security number.
Oh, so it's all in Vietnamese.
It's all Vietnamese, come from the Vietnamese government.
When did you get that?
I've been home probably 7 or 8 months. That come in the mail. This here, of course, is the warrant officer emblem.
Okay.
That's the pilot wings. This here is the emblem of the company I flew with, the Cowboys.
See if I can see that. Oh yeah, there you go. Huh. Puis il y en a d'autres que tu sais pas. Là,
oh yeah, no, I can remember that. That's the, this one's a Army Commendation Medal. This is the Service in Vietnam medal.
Okay.
This is another Vietnam, for being in Vietnam. See where it says 1916? It doesn't say the end. Well, now if you've got it updated, it would say probably 74.
Okay.
This is actually a National Guard medal that I got when I was in the Guard.
You mean after you came out?
Yes, because I flew helicopters in the Guard for about 7 years.
Oh, okay. Gary, what is this here?
This here is a calendar, Vietnamese calendar. You can see.
1970.
Yes, I got there on the 19th, and I crossed off every day, one day at a time, right till I left.
You got there on the 19th of January, 1970.
Yeah.
And then you crossed out every day.
Yeah, every day, one day at a time.
Puis t'as tout fait ça?
Yep.
And then you came back, and here you are crossing out January again.
Well, I left Vietnam on the 15th. Then you travel a day, 16th. Then you take 2 days to get out, and that's when I got back home. Those 3 days is the travel time actually between Vietnam and getting out of the service.
And you do that every day.
Do that every day. A lot of guys did that.
Just like when you're in prison and you're
it's like prison, but you had to have something to do, and that was one of the things I did.
T'avais hâte de t'en ir.
Yep. This here, pretty proud of this. This is called the Distinguished Flying Cross Society. It's for the people that have been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Got my name right on it, and everybody that's in it. There's mine right there, Gary Frenchy Dumond, and tells a little bit of the history and what I did and where I was.
Yeah. Oh, les boys. Moi, tu vois les couverts de ça encore, hein? I want to see that. It's got your name on it.
Yeah. Chief Warrant Officer, 2nd grade.
When did you get that?
About 4 years ago, I found out, no more than that, about 6 years ago, I found out this existed, and I went in, and of course there was my name with the citation, the 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and then they came out with this book, and if you belong to the society, then you got the book. This here I've belonged to for 20 years, and this is the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, and there's a little short thing on me right there, and some guys on this page actually were in my flight class.
Wow.
This is a book I get every year. Show you a little something about this one real fast.
It's a directory.
Yeah, directory. There's me listed there, and I mean I find a lot of people that way.
Some guys that you...
oh yeah, it tells you the flight class, when they were in Vietnam, what company they were with. You see this one right here? This is the year I was in Vietnam. The ones in yellow, which probably won't show up, are the pilots that were there while I was there, and the ones that got the little mark by it get killed while I was there, 9 of them.
Wow.
in my company. Now the flight class, right here. This here is my flight class. The ones that are in yellow get killed in Vietnam. There was 155 in the class, 17 get killed in Vietnam.
You knew all these guys?
Well, you spent 48 weeks with them.
Yeah.
Some you knew better than others, you know.
Yeah.
But quite something.
But you survived that pretty good. You were lucky, and you enjoyed what you were doing, I think, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a lot easier if you enjoy it.
Now these things on the wall there.
That's actually some of the medals. They're the paper part of it, you know, the citations. The two on the left are the Distinguished Flying Crosses.
Okay.
And like I say, one of them I got after I'd been home about 6 months.
And you got more than that?
Yeah, I just got Pauline doesn't want me to put them up until I find some more frames to match. Either that or we buy a whole bunch of new frames.
Okay. Gary, you come out of Vietnam in 1971, and you come right up here?
I come right back home to get married. I get married about 5 days after I get back from Vietnam. And I went to work for Alan Dow. He had the filling station, Main Street Chevron. But I had worked for Alan all through high school.
Now, Main Street Chevron is where?
Where Docks is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I had worked for Alan 4 years, all through high school. I mean, it was like a second father to me. And
so he owned that?
Yeah, he leased the building, I think, from Guy Dago, but he owned the business at the time.
Oh, okay.
And I came back and I worked for Alan for part of the spring. And along about May, I went to work for Aroostook Airways. You remember that?
Yeah.
In Presque Isle. It was owned by Dr. George Higgins.
Yeah.
I went to work for them, flying fire patrol and single engine charter. I did that till about August. In August, I get a call from a guy in Portage named Charlie Robinson. I knew him all my life. He was my father's age. He was a pilot for the forestry, and he said, "Hey, we're hiring a pilot in Old Town, and we want a helicopter pilot, and we'd like you to apply for it." Well, you know, I'm still 21 years old. So I applied for it, and I went down for the interview, and I got the job.
T'étais jeune à planète ou pas?
21 years old, here I was flying helicopters in the Maine Forest Service, but you know what? I had more experience than the guys that were there. They didn't have any helicopter experience. But my whole thing was to fly float planes and ski planes. That's what to this day, that's still what but that's how I got into that. So I went to work forestry. I was the state's first helicopter pilot. And I worked for the forestry a little over a year. Then there was a pilot that used to be in Eagle Lake years ago named Dick Varney. Dick Varney got killed in a helicopter accident as a warden pilot in the fall of '72. So Warden Service needed a pilot right now. It was a busy time of year coming up on hunting season. I get a call. I get a call from Charlie Allen. He was the Deputy Chief Game Warden. He says, "Hey, we need a pilot right now, and we sure like to have you." So I took a ride to Greenville, and geez, they had a brand new Cessna sitting there. The pilot that had got killed, he had just got that airplane. They said, "That'd be your airplane." Well, you know what? When I was in high school, I wanted to be a game warden pilot. And here it was knocking on the door. And didn't take long to figure that out. I left one good job for another good job, but I mean, that's the best job in the world.
So this was not a helicopter anymore?
Yes, we still had helicopters. One of the reasons I went to Warden Service is they had got a couple small bells, and another pilot and I had experience, and Jack had some experience flying helicopters, but basically we flew float planes and ski planes, but we used the helicopters some on searches. So I went to work for Warden Service in the fall of '72, and I stayed right there till I retired here in '91.
So did you lived on this point here for a while?
Yeah, well, when I first went to work Warden Service, I was stationed out of Old Town till '85, and I was responsible basically for all of eastern Maine, way down to Lubec and way down to Rockland, and for 3-4 years I had all the way to Kittery. And then when Jack got close to retirement, because Jack's the best friend in the world I ever had, and when he got close to retirement, I mean, I wanted to be a warden pilot in Eagle Lake, and I mean, I was waiting for that. So Jack retired in August of '85, and I came to Eagle Lake and took his slot.
Jack McPhee?
Yes. And
I remember when Jack was here.
Yeah, Jack was an Army helicopter pilot. Jack was an Army pilot that that's where he got his helicopter training. He'd been on active duty for about a year, then he was on the guard for quite a few years. And that's where he got his experience, and then he got a job as a game warden, and then when there was a pilot position, he got the pilot's position. You got to remember, when I got hired in '72 as a game warden pilot, I was the 11th pilot that they'd ever hired since the early '40s. It's not the kind of job that you get and you leave. There's people waiting for those jobs. Nobody ever had a better job than that was.
So, what was the purpose of it? You went for...
You were the eyes of Warden Service, basically. I mean, you name it, we did it. I flew all the governors from Governor Curtis right up through Governor King. I flew him after I retired, working part-time for Warden Service. You did search and rescue, fish stock, and law enforcement. You were your own boss. Like I say, the best job that anybody in the world ever had. I mean, we had a ball with the skidoo shop. I don't regret that one bit. If I had to do it all over again, I'd probably still be the game warden pilot in Eagle Lake today. It's just a really good job.
So how long were you here in Eagle Lake?
We moved here in '85 and retired in '91. We bought the skidoo business in '89, and of course Dad kept working there, and I had Paul working for us and Pauline. But I mean, I was flying every day. When the weather was good. When the weather was bad, I'd be at the skidoo shop. But I had to work till '91 to get my full retirement. Imagine I retired at 41 years old, full retirement. That's because they had a special law enforcement retirement. And I knew that I couldn't do both and do it justice. And I made the commitment that, and I remember my father not wanting me to retire from warden service because, he was as proud about that as I was. But I just couldn't do both. I mean, it was not right. You can't be flying around bad weather on the Allagash Waterway wondering if they got somebody's sled put together, you know what I mean? And so I knew it was time, and made me feel good because they begged me in Augusta to stay, longer. And I mean, they had somebody there that could fill my shoes pretty well, and a friend of mine, and that, matter of fact, he's the pilot I go see in Alaska there now, and he took my slot. But it felt pretty good that they didn't want you to go. But you know what? I'm still doing some flying for him part-time.
Really?
I went on a search just 3 weeks ago, found a guy in Portage that spent the night in the woods.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You don't... when you're a Maine game warden, you're always a Maine game warden.
What did you see here in the state of Maine that was the worst thing you ever saw? Drownings or...? Well,
drownings. In my career as a warden pilot, I found... I can't remember the exact numbers, just a little over 200 lost people, either lost, drowned, or missing. And they weren't, I mean, some of those people were dead that I found. I mean, the thing that bothered me the most was back then there wasn't as many roads in the 70s, and a lot of the drownings would be, in the backcountry, so you'd pick up the divers and you'd bring them into where the scene was. And what used to bother me was kids. I mean, it's just kids, it bothers anybody. I don't care what kind of an accident, but kids used to bother me. But it was not a dangerous job. It was a dangerous job. I mean, driving your car can be dangerous, but it was, you always leave yourself an out. When you fly, you always leave yourself an out. You got to have somewhere to go or something you can do if something is not going right. I don't care if it's weather, just never put yourself in a corner. And, we lucked out. I mean, we lost a couple pilots over the years, and aviation's aviation's an awesome profession, but it can be pretty brutal because I've lost some pretty good friends. I've lost my best friend, Jack McPhee, there a couple of years ago.
He crashed, huh?
Yeah. He crashed because he had a medical condition that come upon him. There's no question about that. I mean, that brought a lot of closure for me when we got the medical report. He had a heart problem. And, he wasn't feeling very well, and because Jack would have never tried to land that airplane that road, because he could have set it down in the woods and walked away from it. That's how good a pilot he was. But you know what? When you're having a heart attack and you don't know if you're going to live, you try to put it as close to the road as you can, or even in the road, and you're probably not thinking as clear as you should be. So the cause of death is an aircraft accident, but the cause of the accident was medical. Because to this day, if there's nothing wrong with Jack and the engine quit on that airplane, he'd have just set it in the woods, and somebody would have picked him up and he wouldn't have had a scratch on him. Not that type of airplane.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's when you do that every day like he did.
Now you've retired again.
Well, I don't know how to take that. I mean, I went to Alaska for 2 years ago. A friend of mine that had taken my place as a warden pilot calls us, come up and visit. So I get an airline ticket, and this after I sold the skidoo shop, I take it, and I head up there, see him 4 or 5 days, and I stayed for a month.
In Alaska?
Yeah, he needed a pilot pretty bad, and there's a lot of pilots in Alaska, but there's not a lot of them that can work a short period of time. They all get good year-round jobs or whatever. So I went up and I spent a month. It was great, and it was a hell of an experience, and I showed you some pictures of it. Last year, I'm watching a Red Sox game, and I'm not a Red Sox fan, but there's nothing else on.
Well, we know that.
So around 10 o'clock at night, the phone rings. I look at Pauline. I said, that's Alan Ryder. I pick up the phone. That's Alan Ryder calling from Lake Clark in Alaska, and he says, hey, I'm in a bind here. He says, I need a pilot. And I said, what's going on? He said, well, I need somebody real soon. I said, well, how soon? He says, tomorrow. Well, I can't be there tomorrow, but I said, I can be there in a week. Okay, I said, how long you need me for? A couple of weeks? He says, 2 months. I swallowed kind of hard. I said, okay. 3 or 4 days later, I struck her for Alaska.
So what is that in Alaska? You travel people?
Yeah, you take people fishing. A very high class establishment where I work there. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. Costs $7,000 a week to go there. And for example,
if you're a fisherman, you mean?
Yeah, but the fishing, there's no way I can describe it. I could show you pictures, you probably wouldn't believe it.